All right. Well, welcome to Open Ed Week with SUNY Online. Whether you are joining us in person or watching the recording later on, we appreciate your participation. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Danielle Apfelbaum. She is the Scholarly Communication Librarian at Farmingdale State College, and her primary responsibilities include, but are not limited to, assisting faculty and staff with navigating copyright, fair use, open licensing, and open access publishing. So welcome, Danielle. We're interested to hear about your project.
Thanks so much for having me. So today, the primary focus of my presentation is going to be to discuss how folks can leverage their experience as a reviewer for the combined IITG OER Impact Grants program to provide invaluable support for campus applicants who are looking to fund their work in open education. So I'm going to begin today with an overview of what we're currently doing at Farmingdale. And then for those who have not volunteered as reviewers for the programs, I'll go over some tips for making the most of your first time reviewing experience. And I will also discuss how to take what you've learned from your experience and translate that into practical strategies for coaching your own campus applicants. And I should note, I know that folks may be watching from outside of SUNY, and that not everybody is from within SUNY, but I do think a lot of what I'll be sharing today can actually be applied to the internal and external funding opportunities that may be available at campuses outside of SUNY. So just for some context, in 2018, I was hired as the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Farmingdale State College, and we're faculty here at FSC, so I needed to start building up my tenure portfolio right away, and that included service. So a colleague had mentioned reviewing for IITG as a good SUNY-wide service opportunity, and I took them up on that offer, and I've been reviewing ever since, excluding a slight break during the pandemic when the grants were on pause. I was also brought on as the OER lead, so supporting OER and open education was part of my responsibilities from day one. And when I started, we did have some funding from SUNY OER services to support our projects, so that really kicked off an interest in OER on campus. But when our funding was no longer available, it did make it a little bit more difficult to promote OER. But then in 2023, the OER Impact grants were released as a standalone grant program. And it was really the perfect opportunity for me to kind of insert myself into the grant process, which I will talk a little bit more about in upcoming slides. And so that year I served as both a reviewer for when the OER Impact grants were a standalone program and IITG. And our previous provost had actually agreed during the OER Impact grants that folks had to meet with me prior to submitting their application for campus. And we ended up continuing that model going forward with the combined IITG and OER Impact grants in 2024 and 2025, and just recently in 2026. So our new provost has been extremely supportive of this approach, and I actually, again, just finished up with our 2026 applicants. So in the previous slide, I talked a little bit about inserting myself into the process when the OER grants were a standalone opportunity, and I want to expand on that. So I felt really strongly that I had a lot to offer folks who were preparing to apply for these grants. In addition to having been a first-round reviewer for both of those programs, before they were rolled into one application process, I was and still am the campus OER lead. I have taken the the Creative Commons licensing certification program, which is absolutely great and I highly recommend. And also my second master's is in instructional technology. So I felt like I had a really unique combination of experiences and expertise that would really allow me to help our campus applicants put together some really strong proposals. But I knew that I had some challenges that I had to contend with in terms of getting folks to actually utilize the support that I was offering. So our director at the time and I suggested to the provost that we could incentivize meeting with me by making it a required step to getting that mandatory campus letter of support. And to be honest, I've been really spoiled when it comes to support from both our previous and current provosts. So this wasn't something that I had to fight for. But for those who might be having issues, getting that to be part of the process or having buy-in, I have some tips for how you might rationalize your involvement in the process. So first, when you're reviewing, you will see applications that make you go, if they had been a little clearer about this, or if they had just mentioned that, you could have given them a more favorable score. So having access to someone who is reviewing applicants' proposals with a reviewer's eye prior to submission can really help folks to not make these mistakes when they submit their applications. And by virtue of that, this is going to increase their odds of scoring higher, which increases their odds of actually getting the funding. So part of this rationalization was that what we were offering as part of this library service was that we were helping them increase their odds of getting funding. And second, it can also help to streamline the process as the deadline rolls around. So this year, everybody who met my internal deadline for reviewing applications went on a list that I then sent to the provost. And from this list, everyone's letter of support was generated and then sent to me, and I distributed to them. So it really streamlined the process, and we didn't have a situation where 100 different people were reaching out to the provost right up until the deadline trying to get these letters of support. We knew who had met with me. I created a list, and they all got their letters last Thursday. So what does this actually look like during a cycle? So first, everything starts with campus messaging, and I'm including the link to the messaging that went out this semester because I think it provides a nice example of how you might format that. Gearing up to the release of the call for the grants, I always touch base with the provost regarding our timeline, especially once I know the submission timeline for the program. So this year we set an internal deadline of Friday, February 20th for getting application drafts to me to review. Then I committed that weekend to reviewing applications. This way, first thing Monday, I could request all of those letters of support so they would have it prior to the March 1st submission deadline. And this messaging is really important because if you do take on the role of supporting applicants, they are going to make a lot of demands on your time as the deadline approaches. And they're going to ask for extensions. I've never had a year where everybody submitted it perfectly on time, and that's just part of the process. So the deadline that I set also incorporates a bit of a cushion so that I can accommodate the applications that roll in a little bit late. Also, clear messaging from the get-go really gives you a chance to set and maintain boundaries, and you really should think about that because even though this is very rewarding work, it is also very intense work, and it is easy to burn out doing it. So one of the biggest challenges to providing support is really just figuring out who's applying for the grant. And this is important because we do have an external grant application process, as I'm sure other campuses do. And folks really need to know that they need to start engaging with lots of different offices on campus before they submit their grant. So what I do is I take that ideation spreadsheet where everybody who's done ideation stage has their projects dumped into, and I use that to figure out who's applying on my campus, and I start a preliminary mailing list. And as I learn about more folks who are interested in applying, primarily from our campus messaging, I'm able to put together basically one mailing list where I keep in touch with folks throughout the call cycle. And usually I email them 2 to 3 times during the cycle just to reiterate our internal deadlines and all the other offices that folks should be communicating with leading up to their grant submission. So in terms of actually working with applicants, I find that they fall into one of 2 categories. There are folks who want to interact with me a lot, and then there are folks who seem to want to interact with me as little as humanly possible. And my goal is just to meet folks where they are and accommodate them, whatever they prefer. So folks that prefer more interaction with me tend to reach out very early in the process. They usually like to schedule a preliminary chat just to see if their project is a good fit with the program. And they'll also often send me one or more drafts in advance of the internal deadline. And they usually just keep in touch very regularly with questions. For these applicants, I spend anywhere between 5 and 8 hours with them throughout the call cycle, working with them and their materials. Then you have the folks, as I said before, who tend to prefer a lot less interaction with me, and they tend to submit their drafts on or sometimes after the deadline. And I tend to spend about 2 to 3 hours working with these applicants and their materials during the call cycle leading up to the deadline. And as I noted before, there are always folks who get in touch with me very, very late in the game, like a week out from the deadline for the program. And usually what I do with these folks, because, at this point, I may not have the time to work with them. And also, there's only so much time to get those letters of support. So usually if I have folks contacting me a week before the deadline, I just encourage them to get in touch with me in the fall and let's talk about applying for the next cycle. And the final aspect is just requesting those letters of support because this is a mandatory part of the IITG OER Impact Grant application process. So the Monday after that internal deadline that I set, I then compile one list of applicants who have worked with me or have sent me drafts and received feedback. I send that over to the provost's office. They generate all those letters at once, and then they send them to me to distribute to the applicant. So it's pretty streamlined in regards to them getting their letters. So has it been effective? I would say we have just some preliminary data and, between 2012 and 2023, I took a look at the successful applicants who either were the lead on a project or were collaborating with another campus. And looking at those numbers in terms of the successful applications we had about 1.4 successful applications per year. And then I took a look at the years in which I was involved and the applicants in which I coached throughout this process. And during that time, 2024 to 2025, we had about 3.5 successful applicants per year. So, it's not statistically significant. I haven't crunched the numbers, but so far we can tell it hasn't hurt. So it has been incredibly rewarding. We are seeing some gains in the number of applications that are successful per year. And there have been other outcomes as well. I see I made a typo. Always after you send the slides, right? But some of the other outcomes first, we are now able to link some of this external funding success to activities in the library. And really more important than anything else is just the amount of relationships this process has fostered. The money has been great, helping folks get that money, but one thing I have noticed is that the visibility of the library has definitely increased since we started providing this kind of support. And it's also helped me build a lot of relationships with departments that I don't normally work with. So I am much more cognizant of the procedures of departments like our grants office and IRB and IT. So that has been a wonderful outcome as well. So for those who are interested, excuse me, excuse me, those who are interested in getting involved, sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water for just a minute. It's cold season and I'm losing my voice. So for those who are interested in getting involved in this sort of coaching, I recommend spending at least one cycle as a reviewer. And I'll go over signing up to review for IITG. But for those who are watching from outside of SUNY, I recommend if you know of some grant programs that can support open work, just reach out and see what the process is, maybe helping out as a reviewer. Again, it is a very valuable experience for helping others when it comes time for them to put their applications together for these programs. So signing up to be a reviewer for IITG and the OER Impact Grants is super easy. You just navigate to the homepage for IITG, and then at the bottom, you have the become a reviewer option. You'll click learn more, and that will take you to a form, which you can then fill out. And I also want to point out that the reviewer rubric is available right at the top of the page under the title. This can give you a good idea if this is something you would like to commit to because it's a pretty in-depth rubric. So I definitely recommend before you commit to it, you might want to take a look at that as well. But I should also note, I've already started receiving my assigned applicant pool to review, but I know that at the end of, or close to the end of every review cycle, there's always a couple of folks who can't complete their reviews. So you may still want to fill out this form now, and perhaps if there are some remaining applications that need a reviewer, they might be able to get in touch with you for this cycle. Otherwise, I recommend just remembering to come back to this next fall and filling it out. This way you can get on the list of volunteer reviewers. So reviewing for the first time can be really intimidating. So I have a few tips for reviewers. And again, these are specific to the IITG OER Impact Grants program, but any of these tips can really be applied to any other programs you're reviewing for, just as long as you're cognizant of the rubrics that they use. So first, mark your calendar. Um, Reviewing applications is pretty intense. So you really want to protect this time like it's a meeting. And I suggest blocking out anywhere from 2 to 3 hours per application for your first time. The more you do this, the quicker it goes. But I'll talk a little bit more about why you would want to block out maybe a little more time than you would usually need for an application review. So IITG does provide a searchable database of successful applicants. It's really helpful. So before you begin reviewing, I definitely recommend perusing 2 to 3 abstracts in each of the funding ranges, just to get a bit of a baseline for what's feasible within each of these ranges. It's also really helpful to keep in mind and guide you when coaching applicants. The recommendation that I tend to make most, and this is based on my experience doing this pre-review of successful applicants, I recommend that folks scale down a lot, because if you look at what's possible in each of the ranges, you'll see right away if you've got somebody who's asking for 35,000 and it's one class on one campus with no collaborators, and only, a few students impacted. Like, that's not something that's going to be as successful as a grant that is maybe asking for less. So again, can't stress enough how helpful it is to look at the successfully funded grants in each of the different funding levels. I also recommend getting acquainted with the reviewer rubric in advance of reviewing, and it can even be helpful to have this in hand when you're looking at the abstracts of successful projects. So there are 10 questions that ask you to rate the strength of specific aspects of the proposal in specific categories, and there are also 2 open-ended questions. The first open-ended question asks you to provide comments on your overall impressions of the project, and the second, which is optional, allows you to provide additional feedback. But I highly recommend using these fields as a way to practice how you might coach your own campus applicants. So it's really a space to let them know what they did really well and why, or also, where they lost points, why they lost points, and what they could do in the next application cycle to make sure that they don't lose those points. Like any first-time user of a rubric, you need to calibrate your application of the ratings in each category. And again, if you're a first-time reviewer, this takes a little extra time. So what I recommend is reading all of the applications through once and just going with a preliminary score. Because by going through all the applications before settling on a score for each applicant, you'll really have a chance to compare the applications in your pool. And this is going to help you, again, establish a baseline for distinguishing between different ratings within and across categories. Now, once you've had a chance to compare the applications in your reviewer pool, you're going to want to read each at least once or twice more before assigning your final score. I find it's really helpful actually to just print them out and then manually mark them up during my preliminary and my final readings so I can give very, very detailed feedback. And as I mentioned before, the open-ended questions really give you as the reviewer an opportunity to let these applicants know where they've excelled, as well as where they've missed the mark and what they could do next time to improve their score in one or more of those categories. So for example, let's say you gave a proposal a 3 in the endorsement and support category because while it had the required letter of support from the chief academic officer, it didn't provide evidence that there was support from other crucial units that would be needed to carry out the project. So you might let them know in a future proposal, hey, it would be stronger if you included a letter of support from distance learning, if that relates to their project. It might be helpful if you include a letter from IT, if it's related to their project. So basically, you want to equip your applicants with some constructive and kind feedback. So if you're planning to offer support to campus applicants who are applying for an IITG or OER Impact grant, there are a couple of ways that you can leverage your experience for future coaching opportunities. And again, as I said earlier, this is for a specific grant program, but a lot of the strategies I'm discussing will be applicable even if you're working within the bounds of another grant program. So first, I recommend taking some time to reflect on your reviewer experience and specifically taking note of any patterns you come across during the review process. So you're going to want to ask yourself, what did applicants who scored consistently high in each of the rubric categories do to achieve that score? And what did applicants who scored consistently low in the rubric categories do or fail to do in order to get that low score? And then you want to ask yourself, how do I take this and translate it into some strategies that applicants can apply in order to avoid missing out on any points in each category? So, for example, in the category that rates the alignment with the chancellor's priorities, I have noted specifically in reviewing applications that applicants who score low tend to stop at just characterizing the project as aligned with one or more of these priorities. High scoring applicants tend to illustrate very concretely how the project actually addresses and supports one or more of these priorities. So keeping these observations in mind, my main strategy is helping applicants maximize their score in this category by first making sure that they have access to information that contextualizes these priorities. And also to help them work through getting more specific about how this project is aligned with and addressing these priorities. So if I read a draft, for example, and an applicant notes that the project is accessible, my response to them is, okay, great, but for whom and how? Is it accessible to individuals for whom cost is a barrier because it is openly shared and openly licensed? Is it accessible for individuals for whom multimodal learning is more effective because its development will be informed by principles of UDL? So again, it's really about getting more specific. Another pattern that I have noticed relates to applicants' understanding of open. So when considering my overall impression of a project, which is that's that open-ended question, I consider how well a proposal demonstrates an understanding of the program's open licensing requirements. Because if a candidate doesn't appear to understand this, there is some question in my mind as a reviewer as to whether the applicant, what the applicant proposes to create as part of the project can actually be licensed under the terms that the grant program requires. So this is a big one for me, probably a big one for me also because I'm an OER lead on campus. So I have noticed that high scoring applicants tend to explicitly affirm and demonstrate an understanding of the licensing terms required, while our lower scoring applicants tend to conflate terms like OER, open access, and open source. And also I've noticed a lot that low scoring applicants tend to refer to OER as if it were like a particular format rather than just reference to the usage permissions. So, thank you, Mary Jo. Given these observations, my main strategy is really just educating applicants on open licensing and not assuming that just because they're aware of OER, they necessarily understand what it is and what it entails. So again, it really starts with identifying some misconceptions they might have and sort of bringing them to an understanding of OER that aligns with the grant program. So full disclosure first, I have to be honest, I really loathe the term OER. I love the idea, but the term I find to be really problematic, especially for folks who are not versed in licensing, because they often think that something that is an open educational resource is just something that happens to be free and accessible on the web and can be used for educational purposes. They don't think about OER necessarily as being OER because of the licensing terms that specifically allow users to retain, reuse, remix, revise, and redistribute materials. And they don't think about the affordances that these permissions present to both students and educators. So again, the first thing we do is get on the same page about what really makes an OER an OER. And then second, I make sure that we have a conversation about the spectrum of openness. And that applicants really understand what they're committing to when they agree to the licensing terms stipulated by this grant program. And also, we have a conversation about the importance of making sure that they actually have the right to license the deliverables that result from the grant in a way that's aligned with the grant requirements. So, for instance, I have worked with folks who planned to build openly licensed texts from previously published works, and they needed to be reminded and they needed assistance with securing permissions to do that because the project that they were proposing really hinged on using materials that they no longer had the rights to. So that is, as I guess, the ScholComm part of my work and the copyright guidance part of my work. I think a lot about that as well, and I provide a lot of uh, assistance with that. And we talk about that a lot because, again, you want to make sure I'm going to make this thing with this third-party product. Can you actually then apply an open license to it? It's not the case in every instance. Finally, I have observed that high-scoring applicants often have a very clear and consistently communicated vision of the project and its outcomes, while our lower scoring applicants might often have a vague or even sometimes conflicting description of the project's parameters and its outcomes. So given this observation, my main strategy here is to get applicants really clear on what the overarching deliverable is and its individual components. So basically, what are you making or investigating as part of this grant? Dissemination of the grant deliverable. So how are you going to share what you are making or investigating as part of this grant? Measuring the impact of the deliverable. So did the deliverable do or did it reveal what you said it would do or reveal? And the dissemination of information about the impact of the deliverable. So how are you going to share with others that the deliverable did what you intended it to do? And I find that getting folks to get clear on these particular components it's really difficult. But having them tease out these individual areas often helps them get clear about the rest of the project. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about scaling up support. So I I am one person doing this particular work on my campus, and it's really time intensive. Um, and it's becoming a more popular feature of, what I do as part of my work as a ScholComm department of one. So I've been thinking a lot about how I'm going to meet the need for this kind of assistant in the future. And so for me, I've been thinking a lot about the possibility, one, of a full day in-person workshop, perhaps multi-session in-person workshops. We have a great relationship with our faculty center. It is in the library. So it is something that we could do with a lot of support in collaboration with that department. But I have also thought about scaling this to an asynchronous Brightspace course, which would really streamline a lot of the documentation, for example, that I have to deal with. And it would allow me to sort of offload some of the things that we do in meetings into pre-curated materials and videos so that folks could focus on that and I could focus more on the final review. So nothing is set in stone yet. We also will be welcoming a new director of our grants office. So I also would very much like to talk to them before I decide how we're going to scale this up in the future, because I will need to bring in other departments as part of something like a Brightspace course. So that is still in the works and that is still all under consideration. But I hope to maybe keep you posted on what we do next year when we have a path forward. But until then, we are going to continue with the individual consultations and coaching model. But I definitely hope that we can scale up in other ways as well. So that is really our program in a nutshell and some of our considerations in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions? Or is there anything anybody would like to discuss?
I'm Mary Jo. Go ahead.
Hello, hello. An excellent presentation. I'm so sorry I came in late. I was working with a plumber at home anyhow, but I'm here and plumbing has been solved. So that's one good thing. But I'm here and the part I did get to hear, I especially was interested in your last point about scaling up because scaling up to me means something different. And I'm wondering about what your thoughts are about scaling up and you may have already covered this already, getting other collaborative partners and how do you scale up? Are, are the IITG grants supposed to be showing potential for scaling up at more system to additional campuses, or is it really just one-offs? In your experience, what have you found primarily works?
So for me, in terms of scaling, I just mean reaching more of our faculty. I don't think I could even begin to wrap my head around scaling this to other campuses right now, just as I'm a department of one. Um, so I'm right now the only one doing this coaching consultation work with our applicants. So I would like to reach more on campus. And one of the things I did think about was like maybe I could train fellow librarians, but everybody has their own specialty on campus. And while some folks have been interested in the possibility of doing that, I don't want to put that load on them. I would rather, um, you know, be able to reach multiple folks at once rather than the one-to-one model. So I have not thought about that, but anybody who wants to talk to me about implementing a version of what I do on my campus at their campus, I am more than happy to talk with folks about that.
So I would just ask if you do pursue Brightspace, make it at least general enough so that it can be shared with other campuses. I love the idea that you're doing one-on-one consultations. I've I've also tried to do that, and when I can, I do. But even this year, and I was asked to help. Yes, they sent me a draft, and I really wasn't able to get them any constructive comments, and I'm so sorry for that. So I wish I was more proactive as you are. It seems like you really have taken this of I really applaud your efforts.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's really, I would say that and it's been a learning process. I've learned a lot since we first did this. And from where we started to where we are now, I've learned a lot about like setting deadlines for folks is really good for you internally so that you have time to review and then you have time to say no. Because there's a certain point at which you've got to return to your other responsibilities. And there's a certain point at which it doesn't matter how much feedback you give them, they won't be prepared. So folks who are asking you to look at their stuff a week out after the deadline that you've set internally, sometimes you just have to say no, and having good campus messaging about the expectations can really help you maintain these boundaries. And you'll be able to say something like, I can't give you constructive feedback at this point because I no longer have the time set aside in my schedule. And then also I find requesting that applicants specifically send you the portal version of their application. This is really important because when I work with folks who are drafting using that checklist, very often they're exceeding the character limit, which the portal won't let you do. So, and then they often will be missing other elements. So I advise them, if you're going to send me a final draft, it's got to be the one that you export from the portal. And if you are not the PI, you need to make arrangements to ask the PI who's submitting the application to export that for you. That will be your best bet of getting really good constructive feedback from me.
And Mary Jo, if I could just hop in too. Danielle, I also do these reviews every year, and I've made a lot of the same observations that you have. I think, I don't work with faculty to prepare the proposals, but I think you've done a great job of kind of capturing some of the common things that we are seeing. and helping them to get them prepared and in a better position for these awards. But Mary Jo, I was thinking about what you were saying about sort of that sustainability, and that one piece on the rubric for the potential for transformative impact is really important. And when, from my perspective and where I sit, I look for if people are talking about how they are going to scale this beyond the project. So whether it is to attach it to something else happening on campus or a larger SUNY initiative or whatever it may be, and not just to say, we hope to present at CIT, right? So part of my feedback is always to offer, here are some other ways that you can talk with and share this with the SUNY community. So I always share our webinar series. I always share some other opportunities because I want them to know that there are a majority of opportunities out there for them to share this in a broader context. And we can work with the library community if that's what they need. We can work with the OER leads if that's what they need, and so forth. So I always look at that when I'm reviewing, to look at that scalability piece and how the things that we offer can help them to get there.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. I also wanted to ask Danielle, she mentioned that your teaching and learning center is in the library. Ours just moved into our library. I guess what I'm saying is, how closely do you work with them, and how aligned are you? How are they interested in grant development with their faculty, or I guess how do you work with them? What's the relationship like?
So originally, the faculty center was previously the Center for Teaching and Learning, and the library director was the director of that program. So when it transitioned, our director really mentored the new director. And so that brought us all into close contact. So I have not done any programming for them yet. I'm on the board, so I participate at their conferences, their awards programs. So I work with them very closely. And I would just say, I know at any time if I wanted to offer a program through their office, that would not be an issue. And in fact, they've invited us to post our programming on their events calendar. So it's a very close working relationship. They will send out if we're promoting something, but it's through our office, very willing to promote that, cross promote it. Or to do programs in collaboration. Right now, they focus, even though they've transitioned to like the faculty center, I find that it's more pedagogy based still. And so anytime we're doing like grant support or finding publications, I tend to just do that through the library. But they're very supportive and willing to cross promote. Okay.
Great. Any other questions?
I just wanted to tag off something that you mentioned, Erin, about like when it comes to a greater plan for extending the reach of the project. One thing that I've also helped our applicants do, being the ScholComm librarian and having a focus on publishing as part of my other responsibilities, like I will use tools like Cabela's or SiteScore to help folks narrow down, open access publications that they can submit their work to and be specific about. Because a lot of people, it's interesting, I'll see on applications, like we'll submit work to an open access journal and haven't really investigated if there is a good fit for their work. So I think another way, especially librarians can support applicants, is helping them with that dissemination piece. For sure. We have lots of resources to help them find outlets that will help increase the reach of that project.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. I think about the process that we have for our academic innovation grants, and I wonder if something like your presentation here would be a good fit and part of that process, or a resource, right? Because we have webinar recordings on how to do all this stuff, but and guides that we have on the IITG site, but something like this might be really helpful for applicants and also people on campus who will support them.
Yeah, I would be happy to continue to share this info. I just feel like you do all the work as a reviewer. and you learn so much, and what you learn is so valuable to folks who, like it kills you when you see a really good project, you know what they're aiming to do, but they just didn't explain it in a way that would allow them to score highly on the rubric. And I feel like that's always such a shame. So anything that we can help folks make sure that how they're expressing what they intend to do, can be done in a way that, nets them the highest scores possible. I think that's great. So I'm more than happy to share this if you think it would be helpful for other folks.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I think another byproduct what you're mentioning right now is awesome because not only does it help the intended audience, I think there's a professional development piece to this that is now something that you're doing, and usually reviewers don't get a whole lot of credit for in APT kind of documents or promotion type. But by presenting this now, I think you've turned that on its head and are kind of making it sharing out what being a reviewer is like. And I think that's you're right. We learned so much. How can we give back what it is, all the good tips and everything that we see?
Yeah, I advise the same when I'm working with new faculty too, who are like really intimidated by submitting articles for the first time. I always say journals are always looking for reviewers, and what better way to learn about their process than to serve as a reviewer maybe before you submit. So I really feel like being a reviewer for so many different things, not just grant programs, is so, so helpful. And I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I 100% second that. I've learned so much from all of the different types of review opportunities that I've had as well. Okay, well, I want to thank you so much, Danielle. There's a wealth of information here, and I will look for other ways that we can share this and connect with you on that. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Just putting a couple links in the chat to online.suny.edu/OEW for folks who are on the recording that want to see more about Open Ed Week at SUNY.
Thanks so much for having me today. Appreciate it.